because we didn't want to make that big initial investment until we knew it was going to really be pay off over time. But now that the series has really established itself and grown and been really successful, we made that investment. It cuts down a lot on coordination, so I'm trying to borrow 40 chairs every time. And then pretty much everything else is donated. Next slide. General overview of the growth and evolution of the banquet series. So we really started small with one pilot event in 2010. We just wanted to try out this idea and see how well it went and sort of fine-tune it. And then in 2011, we expanded the series to 3 events, and we've been growing each year since then. So this in 2012 we did 4 events, 2013 we did 5, and they sold out this year, so we're planning to continue expanding in 2014. We've had the great pleasure of having all of the chefs and hosts after they've participated in one banquet wanting to come back year after year, so that's been wonderful. I already mentioned this about how we first borrowed chairs, tables, dishware and stuff, and we recently purchased them. We've grown our menu of sponsorship opportunities over time. So in our initial banquets, we had one sponsor, which was a wine sponsor who donated the wine. The next year we added a title sponsor. The next year we added sort of multiple levels of sponsorship, and on and on. So we've really sort of grown this series incrementally, and as the series has grown, the promotional value for the business sponsors has grown. And so we've sort of, rather than trying to do it all at once the first year, we've really sort of grown so it happened a little bit more organically. I already mentioned our plans to expand in 2014. And something that we've seen, which we've really been happy to see, is that many folks who attend are returning from multiple events within the same year sometimes, and oftentimes, year after year, folks really make an effort to make it to at least 1 or 2 orchard banquets each year. So that's been wonderful. Next slide. And so finally, I just wanted to end with just some of the things that we see as the keys to the success of this series, which I think can kind of be takeaways that could be applied to fundraising event planning for other organizations. So one is that we've been able to keep these events pretty unique. They really are different from other types of events that other groups are having and are hosting, and are really directly in line with our mission and program. So when people come, it really feels like a Portland Fruit Tree Project event. They can't really get that same experience anywhere else. Another key to the success has been, as I mentioned before, utilizing existing resources and networks. So people and assets sort of already, and connections already at our disposal. So not sort of reinventing the wheel or trying to go out on a limb and do something that's not, we're not already connected to the people, the place, the resources. Another key has been really making sure that participating in these banquets is really rewarding for everyone who's donating their time or resources. So really keeping an eye out for promotional value for sponsors and chefs, and really making sure to capitalize on that for them to, make sure to promote their businesses as part of the promotion of the events, and making it a fun experience for them, and also really making sure that they feel connected to the cause and that they're supporting a good cause. So when the chefs come out, they have a good time and they know, oh, they feel good, like they really supported an organization they feel good about. Efficient systems for planning, coordination, and follow-up. Basically, going back to what I was talking about before, of just really trying to minimize staff time has been really key for us. So from the start, we've really tried to, because we do multiple events each year, really trying to make our systems for each event in the big picture planning, and also just the coordination of each event, be really consistent and efficient. publicity, we found that this year we had a media sponsorship, and we found that that helps enormously. So that can be a little difficult to get when you're just first starting out, but it's basically having advertising that we wouldn't otherwise be able to afford to pay for donated, brought a lot of new people into our events that wouldn't have otherwise heard about them. Our events have been all volunteer driven, so I spend some staff time coordinating, planning the events, but most of the time is volunteer time. We have a board committee that works specifically on organizing the events, and then during the events, you know, the chefs are volunteers, the hosts are volunteering their time to help us set up and make their place beautiful, and then we have volunteers who help to serve and clean up and everything like that. And then finally, a really key piece for us has been really focusing on building relationships with the new and existing supporters for that really long-term value, in addition to raising immediate funds. So really seeing these events not only as fundraisers for the cash that's going to come in to support our programs during the event, but the long-term relationships that will result in longer-term revenues and support from folks who attend these events. So those are sort of the main takeaways, and I'm happy to answer any questions afterwards. So that's
Great.
it.
Thank you, Katie. So now we'll see if Kim is able to connect with us. Kim, are you there?
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Can you hear me? Oh, good. Thank you.
So we'll jump back.
And I apologize, everyone. There was one setting that didn't appear in the test, so we got to figure it out.
All right. Oh, okay, so we'll get to your slides here.
And thank you, Katie, for flexibility. Okay, let me start big picture. This graphic actually comes from Oregon Food Bank, so I can't take any credit for this. But I put this up there just to show how interesting and complex community food system work is and how many ways organizations and funders can participate in it. And this is the essential challenge, I think, with foundation funding, variety, even individual donor funding, is finding clear entry points for donors and funders so they aren't completely confused or overwhelmed. Meyer has done a sort of big picture funding approach to food systems, but that's not typical in the funding community. So next slide. So basically, Meyer created a special focus project in 2011 that actually was originally to address hunger more systemically. Our trustees had made some big grants during the recession to Oregon Food Bank, which they felt really good about for kind of immediate need, but they asked us to start looking around for more systemic opportunities to actually address hunger and food access. And that led us to looking at food systems comprehensively, and we fairly quickly saw the benefits for health as well as economic development, especially in rural communities. The advantage at Meyer is that we have staff expertise already in both hunger and food systems. With my experience with the food bank, one of our other program officers, Paul Reich, is from the food bank, and Jill Fuglister is from the Coalition for a Livable Future in Portland and is very familiar with this work. So we had staff expertise that actually understood the complexity of community food systems and could educate our trustees on that. And again, that's not going to be typical of most Oregon funders. Next slide. So this is a view of our grantees in our special focus project that's been going for a couple years now. Many of these groups now have 2 to 3 year implementation grants that will conclude between 2014 and 2016. I'm sure some of the folks on this call are part of these efforts and would be great resources for folks. We're not adding any new projects to this cohort, this special focused project, but we do welcome viable, strong grant applications around food system work through our regular grant programs. And Meyer has two: our smaller grassroots grant program, which is up to $40,000 from 1 to 2 years, and then our larger responsive grant program, which is $50,000 and over up to 3 years. So we will still be, through our responsive grant making, considering applications from food systems organizations. Next slide, please. So you can see that we have kind of a broad grantee project scope right now, covering all kinds of areas around the food system, educating a new generation of eaters. So many of our projects are working with youth education and trying to grow eaters that are interested in healthy, sustainable, local, regional food. Increasing food access, and you'll hear from the Lemonade Project, but a lot of work by our grantees around SNAP, and increasing people's ability to use their SNAP benefits at farmers markets with CSAs and those kinds of things. Growing a new generation of farmers. We've got several of our projects trying to help new farmers learn what it means to farm and run a farm business. And then in general, across the board, spurring opportunities for market growth, micro-enterprise training, business incubation, access to capital, infrastructure capacity around processing, distribution, marketing. Essentially, we're trying to have it all here at Meyer. We're trying to grow both producers and consumers of local, regional, sustainable food to achieve larger impact and scale and market growth. So it really becomes viable for people to make their living both producing it and then broader access for consumers to actually be able to get local regional food. So we're pretty broad scale and covering sort of across that diagram you saw earlier. Next slide, please. So here's some reflections we've had, and I'm sure many of our grantees would have others as well as agree with some of these. After 2 years of watching our grantees with this work, there's significant public interest in food issues, and it's increasing all the time. Much of it's around safety, but it's also around health. And some of it's around local economies and really trying to build stronger local economies. There's a real critical need for community groups engaging stakeholders and organizing local regional initiatives. And Oregon Food Bank's work with the Feast and the community food assessments has been critical to this. Many of the grantees we funded were attractive to us because of the work they've done through some of Oregon Food Bank's organizing efforts. So that grassroots bottom line piece is really important, I think. There are infrastructure gaps that limit the flows of healthy local food from farm to table. We've gone to an international commodity system, and all of the distribution has gone with that. So trying to recreate or recapture systems that can support local regional food is challenging. And you know, even those folks that are coming at this from the health perspective are starting to understand that if we don't have producers of food to a certain scale to get it out there to consumers, then it's going to be hard to get the health impacts. So you know, the whole system is important. There's challenges with access to capital. That's a huge issue that comes up for people not only farming and producing the food, but those who are trying to do value-added products, those who are trying to do micro-enterprise and processing. Again, we've dismantled that whole, what used to be a local regional system, and now we have to figure out how to creatively build it back. And there's an important role for both public and private funding. Our grantees have leveraged over $1 million in federal funding. Often that requires some local match, but the federal funding and public funding pieces are as critical as any private funding. And then again, when you're trying to attract public funders, foundations, and even some major donors, I would argue, you need to invest in some kind of assessment to be able to monitor your progress and tell your story. How do you know you're having impact? And that can be incremental incremental indicators, it can be longer-term indicators. We have our consultant, Matthew Buck, working on shared indicators across the projects, and we're happy to share that with anyone. But whether it's a formal evaluation process or a very informal one, you need to be able to tell your story of how you know you're making progress. So that's going to be important for funders. Next slide, please. So what's the funder interest in food systems in Oregon? Well, in Oregon, it's limited, direct interest. And many funders are interested, but they don't know it. And I know that sounds like a funny thing to say, but I think when you say the term community food systems, people's eyes can glaze over who aren't familiar with the concept or the work. And it sounds very ethereal, and for many with a business background, it can sound unrealistic. Oh, really? You're going to really fight the commodity food system? How are you going to do that? So I think it's really important to break it down for funders in terms of what's important around having a viable local regional food system and the different pieces of it, and essentially matching your food systems work to broader funder interests and missions. So you may have a funder that says, well, we don't fund food, we don't fund food systems, but they are interested in economic development. They are interested in increasing food access for low-income people. They are interested in supporting rural communities. And they're interested in disaster preparedness and community resiliency. What happens if the broader global food system is cut off from our communities, say on the coast, or if we're cut off from that? How are we going to be self-reliant until those issues get solved? So there's lots of ways to come at it, but you have to break it down, and I think from the term food systems, and really help funders understand why looking at this work can help them meet their missions. And health is another one. Many are interested in improving health, and obviously food is critical to that. And there are opportunities for federal funding, but you need capacity. As anyone out there who's done a federal grant, you know that it takes time. They're somewhat difficult. You have to pull a lot of information together. So there is some capacity need around going after federal funding, but it is out there. Next slide, please. So what resonates with funders and donors? Well, improving, diversifying local economies, particularly in rural areas. I think many funders in Oregon that are statewide or interested in the state are concerned about the viability of local rural economies. Food, and we found this when we did site visits around the state for our food system projects, it really brings people together. It's life-affirming, it's optimistic, it's positive, and some of these communities really haven't seen that in their what has been their economic drivers in the past. So it's never going to replace some of the big natural resource extraction industries, but it is a source of hope that you could actually have food businesses, increase farming, increase value-added products that are Oregon grown and sell make those attractive to a broader marketplace. So I think that there is some hope that you can capture with that. Increasing healthy food access. I mean, there are many health funders interested in food and making it healthier and more sustainable. So again, you have to break it down and show how the work you're doing is going to help achieve those goals. Improving health and wellness, especially for children, I think, and families. Many of our projects are working on youth education. They're in the schools. They're bringing children to the farms. They're trying to create that next generation of eaters. So, for example, a foundation like Ford Family Foundation, one of their priorities at this point isn't food, but it is youth and work with youth. So if that is work you are doing in food systems around educating youth, that may be how you position a request there. Kaiser Permanente, very interested in food work around health and wellness. But again, unless you can create mechanisms for the food to get to consumers, it's going to be hard to achieve those health and wellness goals. Strengthening rural communities, as we talked about, and then I think an emerging one is food justice, equity, reaching and empowering traditionally underserved communities. And this becomes critically important as the demographics are changing in the state and funders are really starting to look at this, because the funding from foundations, including Meyer, hasn't been necessarily equitable over the years. So there's a lot of effort to really look at how do we get underserved communities healthier, more empowered over their own food systems. So I think that's a real emerging area. Next slide, please. How do we engage funders? I think matching food systems to overarching funder interests and missions, but you have to stay true to your mission and focus, and I think Katie said this in the last presentation. You don't want to chase the funding. You want to make sure you're going after funding that is moving your mission and not distracting you from your mission. So I think that's critical. But within that, you can find funders who may not have community food systems as their priority, but as you break it down, different pieces of that would be their priority. So managing the complexity of food systems work for funders who are new to understanding food systems and can easily be overwhelmed by it. We have, Meyer and Kaiser Permanente and Northwest Health Foundation have convened some funders around food systems, and this is something we see is they're all interested, but they just don't know where they're supposed to enter it and how they're supposed to connect with it. So I think understanding funder interests and helping them know that what you're doing helps them meet their mission is really important. And you know, you have to remember, if you've met one funder, you have met one funder. There's no blanket approaches that will work. Foundations all have different sets of priorities. Meyer tends to be very general purpose, and it takes some time and capacity to figure that out, and then go after the ones that make the most sense for you, but also articulate your work in ways that will help them meet their goals and missions. And then obviously the whole point of this webinar, don't ignore the other diverse aspects of fundraising and just focus on foundations and grants. Look at community support, opportunities for earned revenue where appropriate, and I think the lemonade stand will be a good example of that. I think in my experience as a program officer, I've seen earned income, the goal is sort of overestimated of what you can get from earned income. So I caution you to not put all the eggs in that basket, but it can be a complement if it makes sense, particularly in this type of work. Next slide, please. So the future of food system funding, I think we're at a critical time where public interest in safe, healthy food is growing. Foundations in Oregon are interested but inexperienced. You're going to need to teach them with compelling requests that help them meet their missions and goals. And individuals in sustainable food businesses can be passionate supporters, so don't overlook those. And then I think while federal funding is unclear with the Farm Bill and sort of the roadblocks in Congress right now, I think opportunities do exist and will likely continue to exist as public interest grows. You know, there are many examples: specialty crop block grant, farmers market promotion program, federal and state marketing improvement program, community food projects, competitive grants, value-added producer grants. I mean, there are options out there for federal funding, but you need some capacity, so you might explore collaborative projects, you know, multi-organizations coming in together, covering multi-counties as a way to address those staff capacity issues to pull those proposals together. And I think at the end of the webinar, we've got some resources, both for federal grants that can help with that. Next slide. So my final words are really, and it's not on here, but I would first say be active, not passive. You're going to have to do the work to find out what funders are interested and then how what you're doing can or cannot match that, and then creating the case that you can help them further their goals and mission through your work. Be creative within your mission focus as you match to funder and donor interests. Collaborative is always helpful. It doesn't necessarily have to be formal, but showing that you're not in it alone, and this has been critical for communities looking at food systems development, is you have to work together and across a lot of areas of the food system to really make progress. And I think that's attractive to funders. And then be nimble and think beyond traditional foundations, sustainable food businesses, health organizations, individual donors, local family foundations in your community, and earned income. And I will conclude, and then this might be at the end of the webinar as well, but there is one organization of funders called Sustainable Agriculture and Food System Funders that are funders across the country interested in food system work. There are no members from Oregon yet, and Meyer's not a member at this point. But it would be useful to look at their website and just see what other funders around the country are funding this and whether they would fund in the Northwest or Oregon. So that's what I have to offer, and I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Great. Thank you, Kim, for taking the time to present. And yes, all the resources that Kim mentioned will be listed at the end of the webinar, but then I also intend to send out an email with links to a couple of the reports that she mentioned. So thanks again to Kim. And now we'll see if Katie McNeil, our final presenter. Katie, are you there?
I'm here.
All right, great. So I'm going to fly through slides up to your part. And first, a quick introduction of Katie McNeil. So Katie is the owner of Pacific Sourdough, an artisan bakery in Newport on the Central Oregon coast. She's a vendor at the Newport Farm Market since 1993 and was a principal in the founding of Lemonade Project, which we'll hear about next. And baking is her passion, but when not in the kitchen, she enjoys hiking the nearby forest trails, looking for wild mushrooms, fishing the Alsea Bay for salmon, and traveling to far-off places to experience diverse cultural foodways. So without further ado, Katie.
Hello, thank you. Well, I'm very passionate about talking about the Lemonade Project. A little bit of a brief overview. In 2011, the Ten Rivers Food Web, through our foods group, Lincoln County Foods Group in Lincoln County, approached us about the idea of starting a SNAP matching program that they had taken over in Lane and Benton County, or excuse me, Lynn and Benton counties, and wanted to extend it to Lincoln County. And we said, sure, this sounds great. And they said, okay, how are you going to fund it? And the idea of having fundraising dinners happens a lot here in Lincoln County, and in the food business I get tapped a lot for donations, which we love to do, but these fundraising dinners tend to be using the same key group of people, and we kind of thought we needed to think a little bit outside the box. And so we came up with the idea for the farmers market approach to sell something at the farmers market that would raise money in a social enterprise that we could use to fund the SNAP match ongoing. And thus was born the Lemonade Project. It's easy and simple and fun, and anybody can do it, and I'll tell you how. Next slide. So basically what the Lemonade Project is a little business where we sell fresh squeezed lemonade to customers and vendors at the farmers market, anybody who's thirsty at the farmers market. It's run by volunteers, and the product sells itself. It's delicious fresh squeezed lemonade, very refreshing. Everyone loves it. And that's one of the most important things about the success of our business, is that it sells a very good product. The product sells itself. In fact, people come up to the stand, they don't really understand that it's a fundraiser necessarily, they just want a good lemonade. And then while their beverage is being made, they get to read a little bit about what the funding does. And oftentimes they just let us keep their change, or they'll stuff an extra $20 in the jar or whatever, but they're happy because they've got a good lemonade and it makes them feel good. They've now supported a very good project. Next slide. So in case you don't know, the SNAP program is for food stamps. Next slide. And the incentive program is matching funds that we give, no strings attached, to SNAP participants who come, and with their trail card, they are able to purchase little wooden tokens that all the farmers who sell a qualified product will accept as cash for food or plants that produce food and things that are qualified into the SNAP program. And every time they withdraw up to $6 from their SNAP account, we match up to $6. So if they get $2, they get $2. If they get $25, we give them $6. So it's only $6, but if they come every week, that's an additional $24 a month that will help a family eat fresh fruits and vegetables locally grown from the farmer's market that they might not otherwise be able to afford. Next slide. We've had an increase in people who have been able to come to the farmers market or are aware of the farmers market just because of this program. We put out the advertising or the outreach to the low-income shoppers, and they go, oh, I can come to the farmers market? This is great. So they do, and that's made an increase in those shoppers. And I'm sure that they buy other things at the market too, so it kind of benefits everybody. And of course, it gives them access to these nice fresh fruits and vegetables and other good food that they wouldn't have otherwise. Next slide. So why lemonade? Well, we needed a good product. We needed a product with a high profit margin, something easy for the volunteers to make. And I've looked at a lot of other projects that people have tried to sell things at farmers markets where you have a lot of barriers, like, well, for one thing, you have to have a certified kitchen to do a lot of food prep. You have to make sure there isn't any waste. You have to have storage. Well, the Lemonade project doesn't require any of that. It's beautifully simple. Next slide. We have it staffed by volunteers, and we're lucky to have the woman on the left in your picture is a woman named Bonnie Good. Really, her last name is Good, and she's a great person. She called me up in the very beginning, said, I heard you were looking for volunteers. I can come every Saturday, and it was a godsend. She actually now is our volunteer coordinator, and we're into the third year of our project. So we're very lucky to have Bonnie, and I do think that one of the keys to this project being so successful for the last 3 years is we have a really small but important core of volunteers. It doesn't take very many people, but it's nice if they're really dedicated. Next slide, please. And yes, it does. Next slide, please. Here's how this pencils out. We average about 50-cent food cost for the lemonade itself. So that's the cup, the lemon, and each 20-ounce cup of lemonade takes 1 lemon. We basically cut that lemon in half, squeeze half into the cup with ice, throw that half of lemon into the cup, squeeze the other half into the cup, throw it into the compost, add some sugar syrup, add some water, shake it with a lot of flair, which is fun for the volunteers, fun for the people who are buying the lemonade. And with the cost of the cup, the straw, the ice, which is really the only perishable thing that we have. The lemons are perishable, but we never have them sit around long enough to go bad. We're making about $2 a cup at $2.50 per cup. So as you can see on the slide here, we average 84 cups a day. Now you have to remember, this is Newport, we're at the coast. A hot day for us is like 68 degrees in the summertime. The third week that this program was implemented, we had one of those very rare east wind days, and it was in June, 80 degrees. We sold 250 cups of lemonade. We made like $633. It was an absolute blowout. Now, I can imagine that there are a lot of places inland in Oregon where are warmer, and in other places in the country where if you're selling lemonade and it's a hot day, you could really rake in some bucks. And as a business owner, this is why the beauty of this program works for us, because it's a sure deal. There's no loss. Next slide. As you can see, gross profit, 400%, yay. I think you can go to the next slide, Spencer. Yes, well, he's pointing out that many people do Roundup. They'll throw in $3 and say keep the change once they find out what the project is about. In the first year, we raised about $4,000. Last year, a little over $3,000. We assisted many people in accessing the SNAP matching funds, and all of that money that they get, those $6, they're in tokens. They can't take them to the grocery store. They can't spend them at the gas station. They have to spend them at the farmer's market. So what that means is the circle comes around, that money is paid to the farmers for fresh produce and food, And so it helps everyone. It helps the agricultural system in Lincoln County. It helps these people get nice fresh food. It helps make the shopping experience for the customers of the Lemonade Project more delightful. It's a total win all the way around. Next slide, please. And the market benefits from the reasons I just mentioned. The farmers get a great thing, the customer gets a refreshing drink, that we get more shoppers from the fact that maybe those SNAP the SNAP shoppers wouldn't necessarily have come to the market unless they'd had this incentive to get the extra money. So they come and enjoy the market and make it just a good all-around experience for everyone. And I think they also spend other dollars on perhaps non-food items. Next slide, please. So the Lincoln County Foods Group, when we first started this, really we just wanted to make sure that we could keep a funding source for the program. You know, if we'd had a fundraising dinner, once the money was gone, the money was gone. But what we do with the Lemonade Project is every week we're adding to that fund. We're continuing to build our funds. And as the program has become more popular, we have had more, we've dispensed more matching dollars. So we're about running even, I think, this year. But in the very beginning, the first year, we had a surplus of $1,700 at the end of the market season, and that was with giving everyone every matching dollar that they applied for or that they asked for. And now this year, I think we've about broke even. We're going into our winter market period where we still have a little bit of funding that will carry us through to winter, and in the spring again, just like any other business, we'll look forward to an uptick in sales when the weather gets better. In the wintertime, we have tried the approach of using different products, selling hot cider. This year we're selling a hot chocolate and a chai tea, but it's not quite as popular as the lemonade. We also don't have the traffic at the market to buy the type of thing that people would wander around the small indoor market drinking. But for the summertime, there's nothing that beats the lemonade, especially, like I said, if you're in a hot climate. One of the things that we would like to see happen is to, well, for lack of a better word, franchise the Lemonade Project. And I've talked to a lot of other market managers and people involved in fundraising for farmers markets and SNAP programs, and they've gotten all the information from me. We have a very, very simple kit that we've put together, not a kit that we'll give you, but a list of items that you can use to put together a kit. And I think the last time that we calculated last year for one of the markets that was interested, the whole thing to set it up, from if you had to buy everything, would cost $1,200. So that's the startup cost for a tent, the tables, coolers, a juicer, the hand washing equipment. So very, very accessible. $1,200 is not a lot of money, and we would love someday to have the Lemonade Project go nationwide and be able to fund everybody who wanted to start one, and have you be able to go to some market in Boston and see our logo and go, oh, the Lemonade Project, great lemonade, and it funds a really good cause. So that's the grand plan for the Lemonade Project. In the meantime, we're going to keep making fresh squeezed lemonade in Lincoln County and keep making our matching funds program successful. And I have all the information that I can email to anybody who's interested if you want to start your own Lemonade Project. So thanks, Spencer.
Great. Thank you, Katie and Kim and Katie for presenting. There's a lot of great information, and hopefully it will be useful for all the folks that are attending the webinar. So now I'm going to unmute everyone, so if you've got background noise or other things going on, just be sure to try to make it as quiet as possible, and we'll open it up for questions. Let's see. Oh, looks like I have to do it individually. Does anyone have a question to start? It looks like Rebecca has a question. Let me see if I can. Okay, there we go. Rebecca, you're on. Rebecca, are you there?
I've had them 4 buys. Well, I don't know if Heather told you, but it was one day with
Looks like somebody. Okay, well, we did have a question from Ann, which is, does Ten Rivers Food Web, or does Portland Fruit Tree Project have any staff?
Please continue printing in color.
Okay.
I don't know what. That's her job. That's why I'm supposed to buy one.
All right, we've got some background noise. Katie Kolker, are you there? All right, I guess still muted. Katie, are you there now? It says you are not muted. Okay, we've had a suggestion to just mute everyone and then have folks type in their questions in the chat. So Rebecca Landis had a question about licensing for the Lemonade Project and or orchard dinners. So I'll try to unmute Katie, both Katies.
Hi, Rebecca. Yeah, the licensing for the Lemonade Project for the Health Department is a good question. In Lincoln County, we are required to have a license because we're processing a food product, but all we have to have on hand is a hand washing station and a way to rinse the lemonades, and in Lincoln County they do not require benevolent organizations to pay for their license. So they come out once every 3 months, just like they do with other food vendors at the market. They look to make sure we have everything up to standards and code, and they give us a license, and off we go.
All right. And then it looks like Katie Kolker is still muted for some reason, but I can answer the question about staff. So Katie is the executive director, and then they have a program coordinator and one AmeriCorps member that runs the Community Orchards program, and then they also have volunteers that have 6-month terms, and they help with a variety of other of their programs. Okay, does anyone else? Okay, so another question is, what percentage of business cost is salary? And I'm not sure who that question is for.
We don't have any business costs other than materials. Everyone else is a volunteer at the Lemonade Project.
Okay. For PFTP. So Katie's having some problems with being muted. She's going to try to call back in. And yeah, it looks like I have Katie unmuted, but for some reason she's muted. It's not sure what's happening, but hopefully we'll get her back on. Any other questions? So a question to Kim. Do you know of any funding opportunities to do the research and items for staff costs?
I'm not sure what you mean by research. You know, I think that, yeah, Meyer's a little different from some other foundations. I mean, we understand staff costs, we understand operating costs, and you can sort of build that into project budgets for us. But it would depend on the foundation. I think that it's really the case you make for what you can accomplish with your budget. Yeah, I think less foundations are, they're getting less worried about overhead costs, but I do think you have to make the case that your staff costs will allow you to get to this endpoint or this goal. And I don't know how specifically to answer it more than that because foundations are so different. But Obviously, you need staff costs to get projects off the ground. So it makes sense to me at Meyer. I'm not 100% sure how all other foundations would look at it.
All right. So it looks like Katie is back with us. So maybe she can answer the questions about licensing for outside dinners and if you use tents and those kind of things.
Yeah,
Katie?
can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Oh, great. Okay. So yeah, it looks like there were a few different questions. Yeah, about licensing. No, our events are actually considered private parties, so we don't need to get any special licensing. They're all on people's private property. We've had, for example, people inquire, oh, why don't you host an orchard banquet at one of your community orchards, which are all on public land? And one of the reasons we don't is the licensing as well as the logistics of none of our orchards have kitchens. But so because they're private events, we aren't required to get licenses. There was also a question someone had about tents I saw on that feed. We basically find sites in the summer that where we can do outdoor events without needing tents, and then in the fall we find sites that actually have ample indoor space so that we can be indoors if it's raining. And to address sort of the question of staff time, like I mentioned, I do spend, so I'm a paid employee, and I do spend some time coordinating these events, but we've really designed it to be mostly volunteer-powered, so board members who are all volunteers do a lot of the coordination, and then all the chefs are volunteering their time. We have volunteer servers, folks who do cleanup, things like that. So we really try to leverage donated time to sort of really minimize staff costs.
Great. And then there was another question about percentage of, oh, so you kind of addressed that, the business costs. And Rebecca had another question about advertising private events. Have you had any problems with that?
No, we haven't. Yeah, I mean, honestly, we sort of, years ago, we have board members, one who's an attorney and one who's a tax accountant, and they honestly were the ones who did most of the research into whether or not we would need any special licensing. So I'm not sure sort of the ins and outs of what makes it a public event. Like once it's advertised, does it become a public event? But my understanding from the research that we did a few years ago was that based on everything that we do, they're still considered private events.
Great. Does anyone else have any other questions? Here's a question for Katie McNeil. Can you further explain the SNAP matching process that is coordinated by the Lemonade Project? Does the project match with market tokens or with cash or special coupons, vouchers that are recognized by the market?
Yes, our regular SNAP tokens are green and they say $1, and the match tokens have our logo, Tenerife Food Web logo, and they're $2 increments and they're blue. So it's really very simple for the vendor to tell the difference.
And as another concern, I know with SNAP tokens, is there a way that you have a training with vendors about accepting these and not giving out cash as a change?
Right. We have actually 3 tokens in our program. With our system and our card reader, you can actually use your Visa card to buy tokens that are qualified to use as cash for anything in the market that are a $5 increment, and they're purple. And so we have the green tokens that are SNAP, we have the blue tokens that are match, and we have the $5 tokens that are purple, can be used for anything. And we, at the beginning of the year, and when a vendor is newly joining the market, they get a little brochure with the colors and the explanation of what the different tokens are allowed to be used for, and that they are not allowed to use the tokens to give out as change. Every once in a while we have someone a little confused by that, but by and large it's a pretty simple system.
All right.
I'd also, I guess, like to say that in the simplicity of the system as far as running the business aspect of it, it is just simply people pay cash to buy their lemonade, or they use the $5 tokens. We unfortunately can't take SNAP. It's a product to be consumed on site, so we can't. The SNAP tokens aren't allowed to be used for that. And then we simply take out the cost of the goods that we've purchased for that day's market out of the cash receipts at the end of the day and deposit the rest into our SNAP account. It's very, very simple, into our matching funds account. Keeps it extremely simple and easy to account for.
And it looks like we have a question about the syrup, the simple syrup, or
so the sugar syrup in our formula is made with cane sugar, and because I have a licensed kitchen that I can make the cane syrup in, I make the syrup for the market for the Lemonade Project, and I donate it. But you could simply buy a similar product from the coffee aisle of your local wholesale distributor. Yes, it's sugar syrup, but it's not high fructose corn syrup, and you know, if you're going to drink lemonade, you're going to sweeten it with something. Some people use honey. We determined that honey is not necessarily a flavor everybody wants in their lemonade, and the cost would have cut into our margin. And our margin is important to us because that's where our success comes from. So people will ask us for less sugar, and we're happy to oblige with that. And I don't think anybody's ever asked for more sugar, but we certainly would oblige with that. But yeah, we just use a nice, freshly made cane syrup.
Great. Any other questions out there? It looks like we don't have any more. So thank you to our presenters for their presentations and also for answering the questions. As we mentioned as Kim mentioned, here are those resources that are a couple of the ones that she mentioned on grants. So the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition has a guide to USDA funding for local and regional food systems. And the Wallace Center just came out with a report on innovations in local food enterprise. And then here's the address for the Sustainable Agriculture and Food System Funders. So for the first two reports, you can just Google the name of the organization and the title, and you should be able to find it. But I also will be sending out a direct link to the reports. It was just very long hyperlinks, and not sure that everyone would want to write those down. As far as for event planning, the STOP Community Food Center up in Toronto has a pretty good checklist for, they have a program where they have third-party fundraising events, so groups host an event for the organization, and so they have a pretty good checklist on some of the things that, some ideas for events, but then also some of the steps in planning and considerations when putting together an event. And you can find that at their website and clicking on the Events tab and on Run an Event, and on the right-hand side they have a toolkit. And then as Katie had mentioned for the Lemonade Project, if anyone is interested in getting more details about how to run the lemonade stand or in getting one of those checklists for a toolkit, you can contact her for that. So that will end our webinar today. I just wanted again to thank the presenters for taking the time to put together these presentations and also to stay on the call with us for the whole time, so really appreciate them. Here is Sharon and my contact information if you have any questions or comments from the webinar. I know we have a few kinks to work out, but maybe by the next webinar we'll have it running smoothly. And then I also wanted to point out that here's a link to our Facebook account and our Twitter feed. And if you connect with us on either of those, that's where we usually send out a lot of information, not only about our webinars, but also other information going on in community food systems work in Oregon, but also nationwide. And just wanted to let you know that our next webinar is going to be on February 5th, the same time, 10:30 to 11:45 a.m., and the topic is going to be forming a regional food systems council or coalition. And so that is it. So thanks everyone for coming, and hope to have you at our next webinar.